It's responsibilities, whereas people, like, it's not always the case, it's like, if like you have a person that will be bigger or smaller. Yeah. Almost all the time. Yeah. How much like that is good. Whereas like if you like grow up perfect, you know, I don't think it's necessarily. There's like one. Yeah. How do you like yourself, you know, thanks for you.
Well, I think on some global scale, we would, so like.
The same thing.
Like, if you want, if you were able to involve people to look at things and it's more.
Yeah, I think it really depends.
And that was more realistic and also like technology and how much they could balance out more than that. But I think yeah, most people it's harder if you did a worldwide.
You get married or something, so you know, that's very simple. Maybe there is a losing somebody, yeah, like positive.
I think we all
understand. Really happy.
Okay, let's wrap up and then come back together. All right. So what did we come to? Anything interesting arise out of our little small group discussion?
Yes,
Yes, tell me more.
your shirt,
What about it?
it's so odd. Why does it have no buttons? It just has two strings.
This is a samue, which is something that Zen monks wear when they're doing work, and also sometimes farmers wear it too. And so ideally, if I was wearing it properly, I would tie this up. And then tie this up.
Oh, so it's forced.
Yeah.
Now, bad.
So you're practicing,
There we go. What's that?
you're practicing?
I studied with some Zen monks. And I'll tell you more about that in a minute. Yeah. But so when you were discovering whether there's an equal amount of suffering or happiness, you decided my outfit was bringing suffering upon you, is that?
It was some confusion, yes.
Yeah, see, oh, that is suffering. Yeah, okay.
Is it?
Yeah, well, it could be.
I would say happiness, because confusion leads to learning.
Oh, okay, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Maybe, so, okay, confusion, is it suffering or is it happiness?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Beautiful. All right, what do you got?
Our basically said no, there's not an equal amount. That usually the scale will tip like one way or the other, depending on like. You know, kind of the cards you were dealt.
So just depending on who you are, you might have a more suffering or more happiness? Okay, all right.
We were able to agree there's a lot of power and perspective. And across the board, I think most people would say that there's more suffering than happiness. I personally think that it's partial to, I mean, a lot of things, and how you want to look at what you have and what you don't have. Some people can, take for granted a lot of stuff. And so suffering seems to be a bigger part of their life than their happiness, and I think it's a lot of perspective.
We didn't really agree on anything, but there are, there's levels of happiness. But the same thing happens to me and him, he might be ecstatic, it might be nothing to me. There's levels of happiness, and people tend to remember the bad things over the good things, and that's why, in my opinion, it seems that there's a lot of suffering. I mean, people talk about it, look on social media, and you rarely see the good things people do for others. But the bad things are always said, oh, right,
Yeah, happiness doesn't get clicks. Did you have something?
Oh, I was so proud to point out the point that she made.
Right. Any final thoughts?
I also think that your happiness and like suffering, it depends on like what you're going through. So someone's like suffering a lot, what they consider happiness might be a lot less than someone who's not suffering a lot. So it really depends.
Yeah. All of the things that we've mentioned are questions that are involved in Buddhism. The question of suffering and especially the question of perspective and what is going on in our heads is often something that we consider in Buddhism. So this question and how we're approaching it is part of the backdrop to what we're going to study today. So Buddhism is an interesting religion. It's a religion that maybe has a God, maybe not. Kind of depends on what you mean by God. And it arises out of this Hindu backdrop, okay? Siddhartha Gautama, who is the Buddha, was born in India. And so a lot of the perspective, a lot of the worldview has this Hindu coloring, but it becomes completely different. However, things like karma and samsara, the cycle of death and rebirth, that's what samsara is. That's going to be a big role in Buddhism because it's coming out of this context. And it is arising at the end of the Vedic movement. Who remembers what the Vedas are? Yeah.
Fundamental text of the Hindu religion.
It's the fundamental text of the Hindu religion. So in the early Vedic movement, as these scriptures are kind of creating the Brahmins and the priestly class, people start reacting. And so the Buddhist movement is part of this reaction to the Vedic movement as well. However, still all of this background is going to be in there. It's going to be different because they're reacting to the Vedas and have a completely different canon as well. Some people would argue, and especially when I was in school, they wanted to argue that Buddhism is only a philosophy. There's no religion at all about it. And so they would say that actually you could be Christian Buddhists, or you could be Muslim Buddhists, or you could just be atheist Buddhists. Some of that is true. Some of Buddhist practice can just be philosophical. However, a lot of this comes out of a Western mindset that wants to sort of claim Buddhism because we're trying to reject Western religions like Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And so it's not necessarily true. This is more of a secular bourgeoisie approach to Buddhism. And the thing about Buddhism is that it is wonderfully syncretic. That means it takes what it finds. Buddhism is going to transfer from India to China, where it will take on the form of Chan Buddhism. And it will take elements of the folklore, the Taoism that is there. And then even from there, that will move over and become Zen Buddhism in Japan. And so it'll take on different flavors there and different kind of approaches. And then it might even come to America. And we might see forms of Buddhism that look a whole lot like evangelical Christianity, where they'll even call what their youth education Sunday school. Buddhism is willing to take some of this stuff and adopt it for its own purposes. So we discover a wide variety of expression in Buddhism. And Buddhism also brings us to one of the good and the bad things of studying religions. In olden days, the way that you studied religion is you found the guy and you talked about the guy. Right? This comes from the Christian background of religious studies, because in Christianity we got a guy. His name is Jesus, and so we like to talk about him. Not every religion really centers around an important figure. Buddhism, to lesser and greater degrees, will involve the life of the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama. Sometimes I'm going to call him Shakyamuni. That's because with the Zen priests that I study with, they call him Shakyamuni. I'll explain what that name means in just a moment. But so if I say Shakyamuni, I am talking about Siddhartha, who is the Buddha that we think of. But so for some people, his story is very important to their religious practice. So let's learn it. And it's kind of a fun story anyways. And I'm getting some of this from the Pali Canon, which came 500 years after the Buddha's life. which means it might have some stuff that might not have happened. Maybe it did. Let's find out. So he was born around 400 BCE in Kapilavatthu in northern India, right? That's near the border of Nepal. Right? He's on the borderlands, which means already we should be aware that some kind of morphism is going to happen, because often in border areas we get a mixing of cultures, and that includes religious ideas. His father was King Suddhodana, who was the Raja of the Sakya clan, hence Shakyamuni, okay? His name might be legendary because it means he who grows pure rice. And his son Siddhartha became food for the world when he achieved enlightenment and brought his teachings to his disciples. So it could be that King Suddhodana was really growing the pure rice that we see in the Buddha. And because he was the ruler of the Shakya clan, he is sometimes called the Shakyamuni Buddha, which means sage of the Shakyas. The Buddha means enlightened one. Okay, so that's like a title for him. His mother, Queen Maya, had a dream when she was conceiving that a white elephant descended from on high and pierced her side with a tusk, entering her womb. What do you think that means? Yeah?
Is it like an immaculate conception thing or?
So there's no, Siddhartha Gautama is not a god, right? He's just a guy who achieves enlightenment. However, it is a sign that something important is happening, right? So it is kind of like the Immaculate Conception story, in that we are getting a foretelling that this guy's about to be important. Would anyone want to have this dream? Might be kind of freaky. I think that might be a little freaky. Well, his mom thought it was freaky, so she went to the Brahmins, remember they're in India, and she asked, what does this mean? And they said it could mean two things. He could be a Chakravartin, don't worry about that word, but what it means is a turner of the wheel, which means he's going to be a great king. King Suddhodana likes this. If you're a king, you want to know that your son's going to be a great king. It's good for business. Or he'll be a spiritual teacher. Not good for business. Not a lot of money in spiritual teaching, okay? Otherwise, I would be rich. No. So, what happens is, so that's some of the stuff that's going on. Then he's born, and check this out. When Shakyamuni was born, he immediately stood up, walked in the four directions, north, south, east, and west, and said, I am supreme in the world. This is my last birth. Henceforth, there will be no rebirth for me. He's going to break the cycle of death and rebirth. He's going to do it in a way that we might not expect. Something new is happening, and if my daughter does this when she's born on February 9th, I will be disturbed. Okay? Very interesting. He was going to achieve parinirvana, which is super enlightenment, which is he is going to achieve nirvana in this life. That's not how it goes. Normally you have to die and then be reborn in nirvana. No, he's going to do it right now. Something new is happening with this fella. In fact, his name itself hints at this amazing thing. Siddhartha means one who's accomplished his goal. He's going to accomplish enlightenment and breaking the cycle that hurts us. But then there was some sadness that happened. His mom died. He was raised by his aunt, Mahaparajapati, who would eventually become one of the early disciples of the Buddha. She'll become one of the first nuns that follows after him. Now, Suddhodana, again, remember, there's no good money in spiritual teaching, so he did not want his son to be tainted by the world and therefore become a spiritual teacher. He wanted him to be locked up so he would be a great ruler. So he lived in a golden palace that had everything that he ever wanted, and he never had to leave, okay? And then eventually he married a nice young woman named Yasodhara, and they had a son named Rahula. But eventually in his life, gets tired of being locked up in this golden palace and wants to escape. And when he does, he sees the 4 sights that will radically change him. So he sneaks out of his cushy life. And depending on the story that you tell, maybe he had a helper that did this, and that helper is going to be an important character among the Buddhist disciples. Or maybe he did it on his own. It depends on who you ask. But they all agree that when he got out, he saw 3 things. He saw an old man. He had never seen anyone aged before. Not this level of agedness. Sure, his dad was older than him, but not like this old man. And that shook him, because to see age when you're living in this pure palace of youth and immaculate wonder is distressing. Then he saw a sick man. Seems to us that maybe he never experienced sickness, or if he did, it was never too bad, but he saw a very sick man and it shook him. And then he saw a dead man. And you can imagine that this is a very shocking sight if you're living the good life. Right? You are trying to avoid seeing these terrible things. You know that death might be a real thing, but you never have to look at it. But Siddhartha, when he escapes his life, he sees these 3 things. And then he goes home and he's dreading. And he's shook. He doesn't know what to do. And he goes out again and he sees a 4th thing. He sees a wandering ascetic. Now you might remember in Hinduism, when it comes to a certain time of your life, it is customary to go and become a wandering ascetic. So he was seeing one of these old men that was just living a happy life, living totally dependent on God. And when he saw these 4 sights, he realized one thing, that there is a whole lot of suffering in this world, and he wanted to find a way to end it. Nothing like a king or a prince to think, you know what, there's problems in the world, I'm going to fix it right now. Let's fix the problem of suffering. Thankfully, he did have this privileged mindset, because he did. And then, of course, the story goes that he took one last look at his sleeping wife and infant son, gave him a smooch, and then went on his journey to end suffering. And people sometimes, when you tell the story, will have reasons to say, oh, he never really had a wife and a son, because it's a very tragic thing to leave your children and go on an ascetic journey. It's not necessarily the right thing to do. So sometimes they get that story away from there. However, I think a lot of the oldest depictions of the Buddha's life is he did have a wife and a son who would eventually join him in his path. Yes?
When he saw the old man, sick man, dead man, were they apparitions, hallucinations, or real life?
No, the story goes that it was real life, that he was, maybe that when he escaped, sometimes he was like in a chariot, just kind of driving through the street, and he saw for the first time, because he had lived on the compound his whole life. So he really saw an old man, a sick man, dead. He really saw a monk out there. Good question. Oh, and the reason that he did it while they were sleeping is that he didn't want to be tempted to give up his journey to end suffering. And so this is called the going forth. When you become a wandering monk, it means you are going forth from the life that you once had. And again, this is not anything entirely new. Siddhartha might have been doing it earlier than he should have, or it was customary. Remember, in Hinduism, it was sort of something you did at the end of your life. Right? After you've taken care of your kids, they've moved out, you made sure that your spouse has a place to be, then you go forth and become a monk. He might be doing it a little earlier, but whatever the case, he joins a band of monks and he lives the life, asking for alms, begging for food, looking for teachers, but they were all not that great. They taught him something, but he was looking for something more sublime than we might realize. And then eventually, he was so fed up with this kind of, pardon my language, half-assed spiritual life that they were living, that he and 5 of his buddies decided to go hardcore. They are going to fast more than anyone's ever fasted. They are going to meditate like no else. They are going to get to the brink of it. And in fact, it was said that he fasted so heavily that his spine stood out like a string of beads down his back. It's pretty skinny. Later on, he's going to be meditating under the Bodhi tree, And a woman is gonna think that he's a tree spirit because he looks so bad, okay? He is not in a good condition because he is going hardcore. Which brings us to the Bodhi tree, the tree of enlightenment. This is where Buddhas sat before they become Buddhas. Now here's an important thing to know. Remember when Siddhartha was born, he said there would be no more rebirths for him. He had lived many other lives before. There had been Buddhas before Siddhartha Gautama. However, he is sort of the ultimate Buddha for us. He is the perfect picture of the Buddha that we can rely on. Depending on who you ask, many Buddhas are going to come later, and there might be even one great Buddha that's going to come at the end of time. This is sometimes seen as the picture of the fat Buddha, right? He's the one that's going to come at the end of the ages. Anyways, so before in his previous lives, he always sat underneath the Bodhi tree, it is said, before he became a Buddha, before he achieved enlightenment. Anyways, he found a Bodhi tree. He was sitting under it. And as he sat around this, an evil spirit named Mara came and started to tempt him to give up on this endeavor to find enlightenment and break samsara. That's what Mara likes to do. Mara likes to tempt you to stop doing what you're trying to do. Mara said, "Give me your seat." That is his throne where he was meditating, right? It was just a pillow under a tree. But she said, "Give me that seat. You don't deserve it. It belongs to me." And here's what the Buddha said. He said, "You know what? No, Mara, you got all this words. Screw you, man. Okay? Actually, Mara's a lady. Screw you, lady. All right? I'm trying. I am enlightened." And she says, "Who can testify to this?" And so the Buddha placed his hand on the ground, and the earth, he said, "The earth can witness to all the compassion I have given in my past lives and this one." Now, if you're Mara, what are you thinking? Right? The earth is going to testify. Guess what? The earth responded, "I am witness to this." Buddy, if you are in an argument and the earth speaks up, you win. Okay? Mara was defeated, and so he has achieved enlightenment, except remember, he's in a bad situation. Yes, he's defeated Mara, the spiritual inner temptations that's going on. He's gotten this stuff, except he is so emaciated, right? His bones are sticking out. And he's meditating under the tree, but he's so hungry that he actually can't meditate. He just got in a fight with Mara, the tempter, and now he's trying to get back to the work. Has anyone ever meditated before? It's hard work, isn't it? Right? It takes energy. And then it said that as he's sitting in this really terrible situation, a young milkmaid named Sujata saw Siddhartha and brought him some milk rice. This is just, it's an extra nourishing kind of porridge. And she might have thought that he was a tree spirit. Right? He looked really bad, wanted to offer food to the gods. It's a good thing to do. And it's also said, just as a Buddha always sits underneath the Bodhi tree before he becomes a Buddha, a woman always brings some milk rice to him in all his past lives. And Sujata is the final one that did this for him. That's a great thing. But here's the thing. He takes the milk rice, okay? He takes the milk rice, his blood sugar gets back to normal, he's feeling good, and he's able to come up with the middle way. I'll talk about that in a second. But his 5 friends see him giving up the fast. Remember, they were all going hardcore. We are not in a place to stop fasting. We are trying to achieve enlightenment and defeat Mara. They don't realize that he just did this. But they see him and they reject him because he gave up the fast. But he's now achieved enlightenment, he's done all this spiritual work, and he's developed what is called the middle way. He realizes that you don't have to be hardcore. You don't have to be a monk that is completely losing your mind and deteriorating away. You also don't have to live a completely secular life. You can have a middle path that's in between these two. For sure, you're going to spend your time meditating, studying the scriptures, doing what you can. And you can eat some food from time to time, right? I mean, come on. It's a nice idea, and it becomes this middle path between asceticism and self-indulgence. So he gets up from the Bodhi tree. Now, this is very important, okay? We often think of Buddhas as people who sit underneath the Bodhi tree and they meditate the world away, and they don't ever do anything. The most important thing the Buddha did is get up from the Bodhi tree. Because when you get up from the Bodhi tree and you share the gifts of your enlightenment with the world, now you are sharing it with others, right? Spiritual life is not about sitting under the Bodhi tree. It's about being under the Bodhi tree, getting what you need, and then getting up. That's what the Buddha did. All right, we talked about the middle way. Oh, and just so you know, during this night of crazy meditation, he encountered and sort of learned all the stuff that he would later teach. Right? He saw the true nature of karma, the law of cause and effect, which keeps the cycle of samsara in motion. And he gained knowledge of the Four Noble Truths and the three poisons, which are greed, anger, and delusion. And he saw that the Four Noble Truths were a way to get out of this cycle of suffering. We'll talk about those in a second too. And then he goes and he finds his buddies who rejected him. Okay, they were at a place called Deer Park, and he gave his first sermon, which is called "Turning the Dharma Wheel," where he teaches the Four Noble Truths to these buddies that rejected him. Well, they liked what he had to say. They realized that he was, in fact, the Buddha, and they go from place to place and they learn his teachings and they teach his teachings. Eventually, Siddhartha, at the age of 80, he had lived his whole life. He's taught, he's preached sermons, he has a community, the Sangha has grown, and then he was visiting somebody, and he was 80 years old, and he had some spoiled food. And he knew that it was bad, but he didn't want to embarrass anybody. Very nice thing to do if you're just a humble monk. You don't want to embarrass anybody, and he did this so much that he just died. But before he died, he assembled his students, and he said these last words. He said, "Come now, mendicants, I say to you all, conditions fall apart. Persist with diligence." And these last words of the Buddha summarize the basic life of Buddhism. Things are going to fall apart. This world of do is a world of do, yet persist with diligence anyways. Don't just slack off and get nihilistic about it. Keep going. Yes, this world's passing away. Yes, there are 10,000 things that we never will understand. Yes, just keep going. We still have to persist. That is the life of the Buddha in a nutshell. And it becomes the foundation for the spiritual life. People try to emulate him. Yes?
Is it like a Buddha in a certain part? Because they got the big chunky gold things of Buddhists in a different part of the world.
Right. So this is the life story of Siddhartha Gautama, who everybody agrees lived somewhere in India. Even when you get into further East Asia, there's going to be multiple Buddhas. That's part of the Mahayana canon. We'll talk about that in a second. But they would all agree that Shakyamuni lived in India. Yeah.
Okay, is the Buddhist like the one Hindu where they got a whole bunch of hundreds of things, like the Hindus had hundreds of gods, and Buddhists have that too?
Kind of, yes. Yeah. And it depends on which Buddhist sect you ask. So stay with that question, okay? Let's look at the core of his teachings just really quick. All right. In Buddhism, there are the three jewels. All right. These are the three things that you take refuge in that help you throughout your life living as a Buddhist. The first is the Buddha himself. Right. He is the example that you follow. Depending on your tradition, you might literally be someone that you just take refuge in through worship and praise. There is the Dharma, which is the teaching, which is sometimes called the Buddha Dharma, which differentiates it a little bit from Hindu Dharma. Right? But the Buddha Dharma is what you take refuge in as well. And then finally, there's the Sangha, which is the community, the group of practicing Buddhists together. And so as you are trying to learn the Dharma, you stick with the community and you take the Buddha as an example, right? You're always taking refuge in these three jewels that make up the core of Buddhist life. There are the Four Noble Truths. The first is that all existence is dukkha, which is suffering or dis-ease. Not disease, but unease. Things are not quite right. Suffering can be agony, but it can also just be the condition we all live in. We all are being acted upon, right? We live in this world that is just doing something to us. That is sort of suffering, in that we are all passive in one way, okay? But for the Buddha, this suffering that we have comes from the cravings that we have. We crave stuff. We attach ourselves to stuff. We just want more, right? Even if we don't want a lot, we want something. And that creates suffering. And the way out, obviously, is to stop craving things. And in order to do that, you have to follow the Eightfold Path. And so that's the other part of it, right? You've got to have a right understanding of everything. You've got to understand that all existence is dukkha. You got to have the right intention when you go forward in this life, right? I intend to escape this life of suffering. You have to speak right. You have to do things right. You have to live right. You have to put in the right amount of effort to do it, which means not doing too much, but also not slacking off. You got to have mindfulness, right? Awareness of everything that you're doing, and of course, concentration on the task at hand. Sometimes this is seen as one of the great symbols of Buddhism is one of these wheels, right? Because all of these are connected. This Eightfold Path is connected. Okay?
Those wheels are called the chakra, right?
I think so. Yeah.
I saw that when I was doing some of the research for my paper. I just wanted to verify that I understood them. Sort of chakra is the more mystic, new age type stuff nowadays. But I wanted to see if there was a connection or not.
If I remember right, chakra as a word can mean a lot of things.
Okay.
And so sometimes in the because a lot of the chakra stuff comes from Hinduism, and it's sometimes even seen that you had a bunch of wheels at different parts of your body that you were spinning or trying to loosen or something like that. Okay, yeah, I'm not too familiar with all that.
Okay, I don't know very much either.
Yes.
Is there a reason they call it craving instead of envy?
That's a good question. The other word that I often hear is just desire instead of envy. I think envy can sometimes have a totally negative connotation, whereas the word for craving or desire is not necessarily negative, right? It's fine to want things, right? You know, to want to love somebody. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that it creates suffering.
Well, envy also typically has the connotation of specifically wanting something that someone else has, versus desire, it might just be something that no one else is involved in.
Any question? Okay, jumping through these a little bit, there's a few marks of existence, and these are ways to summarize the reality that is before us. Right? Every religion helps us understand this life that we have and how we look at it, okay? So everything except nirvana is marked with these things. Impermanence, right? Everything's passing away. This is a world of dew. Dew fades away as the sun rises, right? It's all impermanence. Everything is passing. There's also no self in it, anatta. Now, this is one of the harder concepts to understand, but nothing has selfhood in and of itself, right? I am your teacher because you have made me your teacher, and I am your teacher because you are my students. But there's nothing that is happening here because of inherent meaning. There is no real self because everything is impermanent. It's all passing away anyways. That's a harder concept to dive into. And then of course we talked about dukkha, suffering. Everything has this suffering. All of these things are related as well, right? Because things fade away, because we can't really understand things as a self-contained unit, we suffer. We're not satisfied with things. I'm going to skip these because they're not the greatest. I mean, look, here's the thing. Greed, hatred, delusion, don't do it. It's bad for you. It's going to set your world on fire. Agreed? Okay, great. We talked about karma, okay? Your intentions lead to actions, which lead to effects, which move throughout space and time, throughout your lives. And they predated the Buddha, right? Remember, we're coming from the Hindu background, and continues the cycle of death and rebirth. What the Buddha did was find a way out of karma. The path of enlightenment melted away karma. And so he sort of solved this problem as well as he's solving suffering. And all of this is to get to nirvana, okay, which is a place, is it a way of being? Don't worry about it, right? All it means is that we become connected with the state of Buddhahood. We enter into the Buddha Dharma. And so in that way, nirvana is a place that we're hoping to get to, and it's also a state that we are in right now. Okay? Nice hoodie. Nirvana hoodie. Yeah. It's also a fine band from the 90s. I said fine, it's a good band. I liked it a lot. I don't know why I just disparaged it like that.
Dunking on them like that.
I don't know, it's a good band. You know, Kurt, come on. Dave Grohl is going through some stuff right now. Anyways, all things have Buddha nature, okay? Everything is a Buddha, all right? Everything at least has the potential to become a Buddha, right? I'm a Buddha, you're a Buddha, or at least we can all get there, right? We all have the potential to get there. So that's sort of the core teachings, all right? But they're gonna be expressed in weirdly different ways throughout a lot of the different branches of Buddhism, okay? There's three major ones. There's Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. Within Mahayana is Zen, so I'm gonna call that sort of a hack one because it's different, but it's still part of the Mahayana background. These are worldviews that interpret the teachings and life of Buddha and then of course create their own as well. So let's start with Theravada Buddhism, which means the way of the elders. And often we can, this is a pretty, it claims to be the oldest form of Buddhism. It claims to be the purest form of Buddhism. And it focuses on the teachings, right? The Buddha himself was just trying to escape the samsara, right? He didn't want to be honored or venerated according to the Theravada Buddhisms. So they would say, forget the teacher, remember the teachings. Because the Buddha was just trying to get us on the path of enlightenment, okay? It's very conservative. For them, everything is centered on our hats. Also, Theravada Buddhism, orange robes. Orange robes, just so you have a picture in your mind. Our hats are perfect beings, okay? They are people that have attained enlightenment. They are perfect. They're Buddhas, okay? And you're trying to achieve nirvana and realize your Buddha nature and you become an arhat. That's the goal. We want to get you to arhathood. That is what we want in here. It's most prominent in Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia. And sometimes in these cultures, it's common that you just are a monk for a year. You know, it's kind of like civil service. You go and you live a spiritual life for a year or two. And the whole point is that it's centered around monks, right? You cannot be a perfect being unless you are a monk, right? Because we're living our lives. How can you focus on meditating and achieving Buddhahood when you gotta go to Safeway, right? You can't, you just can't. So we focus on our arhats, those perfect beings, and we live lives as monks. Now, they would all agree that lay people can achieve nirvana. We will all agree on that. But it's just not likely. Because again, you're at Safeway. How can you do it? Right? You're trying to buy things. There's no way. So if you cannot be a monk in this life, you don't have the temperament, just work on your karma. Do good deeds. Try to improve your spiritual life so that you're reborn in the next life as someone that could become a monk and therefore an arhat. Right? It's a progressive goal. Now, when we think of monks in monasteries in America, we often picture Roman Catholic monks that kind of hold themselves away and you don't really see them. These monks are everywhere, right? They're just hanging out, right? Smoking cigarettes on the sidewalk. It's true, right? I don't think cigarettes are bad karma, apparently. So, it's, and they get their food from begging, okay? So they're often in the center squares where you can just give food to them. The monasteries are in the center of towns. Now, like I said before, in some countries, I think in Sri Lanka, you do like a year of monkery, and it's just something that you do. Some people will take lifelong ordinations. You could take temporary ordinations. It's not unheard of to go and be a monk for a while because you lost a job and you need to refocus on what you're gonna do, or you just, your spouse died, you need to rethink some things. So being a monk is not an either or. It's part of the life in Theravada Buddhism. For Theravada Buddhists, they would say that no ceremony is complete unless you have a monk chanting a sutra, which is one of the scriptures. Right? You're getting married, somebody get a monk, right? So that they'll do the sutras and it'll be great. That's part of this worldview, that you always have a monk somewhere helping out. Grow up, I said. I mean, sassy a year ago. For Theravada, they have the Pali Canon, which involves the Tripitaka, the 3 baskets. These are outlines for monastic life. These are scriptures, I should say, that outline monastic life. There are the sutras, these are the most famous ones, which are sayings, sermons, and dialogues of the Buddha. And in Buddhism, you'll have a whole bunch of different sutras. The Pali Canon is just one. It's thought to be the oldest, but maybe it's not. And then, of course, there's the Abhidharma. I misspelled that. That should be the Abhidharma, the advanced teachings, right? So there's 3 baskets in the main canon of the scriptures that they pull from these various things. The Abhidharma you might think of as like a systematic theology, where it's getting more into really teaching what the Buddha Dharma is. Mahayana Buddhism is what I think most of us picture when we picture Buddhism. At least it was for me. It means the great vehicle, okay? And it's the great vehicle of getting you to your Buddha nature. It has way more rituals, right? Theravada Buddhism is mostly about sitting, meditating, maybe chanting, and that's it. It's very simplistic, whereas there's way more rituals in Mahayana, and it's very imaginative. You asked, are there a bunch of gods? Yeah. And there's not only a bunch of gods, there's a bunch of bodhisattvas, which are kind of like Buddhas. And there's also a bunch of Buddhas. There's a whole bunch of characters that are surrounding this world. It's got so much going on. And for Mahayana Buddhism, it all comes back to compassion. It's all centered on finding compassion for others in it. And so instead of an arhat, which is a perfect being, they will focus more on the bodhisattva. A bodhisattva is someone who is able to achieve enlightenment, but stops, so that they may be reborn again and help lead all people to nirvana. So a bodhisattva is almost a perfect being, except they stop from being perfect in order to help all people achieve enlightenment. Right? So arhats are perfect, bodhisattvas are almost perfect, but for a selfless, compassionate reason. And so in Mahayana Buddhism, instead of trying to be an arhat, you're trying to become a bodhisattva, right? You're a Buddha to be. Yeah, you'll make a promise to be reborn until all are enlightened. Think about how selfless that is, right? You're going to go through this again? Wow. So all the cosmos for Mahayana have Buddha nature. Everything has Buddha nature. Rocks have Buddha nature. The stars have Buddha nature. You and I have Buddha nature. And we see Buddha nature through the 3-body doctrine called Trikaya. There's the Dharmakaya, which is the cosmic Buddha nature that permeates all things. This is arguably God. It is divine. You worship the Dharmakaya, but we don't think of it as a person. It's more of a... There's one book on Buddhism called God Does Not Exist and He Is Always With You. That's kind of what we're talking about here, right? There's no gods except there is. And they are this thing that permeates all things. It's our true self, it's our Buddha nature, right? It's the stuff that's all around us. But there's also the Nirmakaya, which is the physical body of Siddhartha Gautama, right? Remember the three jewels. You take refuge in the Buddha Dharma, you take refuge in the Buddha himself. Here we have another way of understanding Buddha nature, which permeates the three jewels. Oh, but it also includes past lives and the bodhisattvas associated with them. And then the Sambhogakaya is the perfect bliss Buddhas. This is the heavenly Buddhas with their own Buddha lands, kind of like gods. And one of the most important ones is Amida Buddha. What did I say here? Oh, but they're not bodhisattvas. It's a little confusing, right? They're Buddhas, but they're bodhisattvas, but they're reborn. It's a different worldview than we might be ready for. So Amitabha Buddha is, we go until 6:30 or 7?
7.
Okay, cool. All right. Amitabha Buddha is one of these Buddhas who's a heavenly bliss Buddha, who has one of these Buddha places. He lives far in the west where the sun sets. Far, far west, more west than us, probably more west than Russia, right? Far in the west, Amitabha Buddha lives. And this place that he lives is called the Pure Land. And the Pure Land is a place that you can be reborn so that you can have an easier time escaping the cycle of samsara. It's easier to achieve enlightenment in the Pure Land. So it's a heavenly place, but it's also a very real worldly place. It's a place that you go in order to escape, right? So it's almost like a pre-heaven, right? We often in life think about, I want to go to heaven. For the Pure Land, it's more about, I want to get to the Pure Land so I can go to heaven, right? I want to get to the place before that. And Amida Buddha promised that everyone who calls on his name will be reborn in the Pure Land. If you just call out to Amitabha, he will bring you into this Pure Land where you have a better chance of escaping the cycle of death and rebirth. Here's a picture of that Pure Land. Looks pretty good. What about you? And Pure Land Buddhism is very interesting because it kind of looks like evangelical Christianity for a lot of people, wherein they are preaching the good news of Amida, that all you have to do is call on his name. They have Sunday school. They sing hymns to Amida Buddha, depending on which denomination of Buddhism that you're coming from. I think it's Shinjodo Shinshu is one of the big popular denominations of Pure Land Buddhism around, right? But he is admittedly just one of these heavenly bliss Buddhas, right? Just one Buddha of compassion that is bringing us to this Pure Land. There are other ones as well. In Mahayana, it's important to know that everything is shunyata, which is empty. We talked about no self. This is related to no self, right? There's an emptiness to everything. It doesn't exist on its own. But that doesn't mean it's a bad thing, okay? A bucket is useful because it is empty. That's why we like a bucket, right? If there was a bucket full of stuff, I can't do that. I can't fill that with anything, right? So the fact that everything is empty is not a bad thing. It just reminds us that this world is passing away. And so we have to remember that all things are empty. They're constantly changing. They don't have an identity on their own. Everything is related to everything else, okay? There's an idea called independent co-arising, right? I exist because you exist. We are growing together. And even though we might never meet each other, there is because you're living a life and this person over here is living a life and they're going to affect things that you're going to affect and they're going to cross over. And so no matter what, we are all arising together. That's why there is no real self. That's why all things are shunyata. Because everything is dependent on one another. Nothing is of itself. And one of my favorite concepts is tathata, which is this silence, thisness, right? Right now, it's autumn. The trees are yellow and red, right? And there's just something that just makes you go, oh, right? And you're looking at a tree with only a few leaves on it. You just, right? Don't you? Yeah. Tathata. That feeling when you're just, right? That's what that is. It's a because it's a reality that you see, right? There's nothing like a tree. I mean, it's a tree. Look at it. It's amazing, right? That's what this is. Tatar. Okay? And you can appreciate the uniqueness. I mean, what kind of orange is in the hills right now? You don't see that in books. Maybe you do. Mahayana has a lot of sutras. And they are just, everyone knows they came later. People don't worry about timelines in Mahayana Buddhism because the truth is the truth and who cares, right? These scriptures are way more fun, okay? There's the Vimalanakirti. This guy, he was a layman who just lived a fully devout Buddhist life and achieved nirvana and did great. Which this whole scripture basically is laughing in the face of Theravada Buddhism, right? It's just some guy, and he achieved nirvana. LOL. Okay. The Lotus Sutra is one of the more famous ones. This is where the Buddha shows his cosmic nature, that he teaches the emptiness of things. And so we really see the Buddha in his most excellent golden 10-armed Buddha-ness. Mahayana itself has a lot of schools, okay? Yeah. And here's the thing, don't worry about knowing all of these, okay, because they're pretty similar. But there's just a whole lot of different kinds of schools of it, right? Shingon is big on mantras. They love a ritual, okay? The Goma ritual is a fun ritual where you are setting things on fire and you're just slowly throwing leaves into the fire to help achieve nirvana or achieve enlightenment as you see these things burn up and fall away because nothing, it's all, everything, this Svaha world is, it's all disappearing. So you throw things in there. They are often will do mandalas. You know these are like the sand art that you kind of make and then it disappears. They have two different ones. There's the Kongokai and the Taizo. The Kongokai is the diamond world. It's looking at the world from the lens of the Buddha. So you make this artwork that looks cosmic and strange, right? And then that passes away too, because even the Buddha's world is impermanent. It's all passing away. Taizo is more like you're looking at hell. It's gross. It's really yucky. This too will pass away. So these are a couple of things that they, couple of practices for this group of Mahayana Buddhists, similar to Tibetan Buddhism, which we'll talk about in a second. Oh yeah, you know, we got to talk about Tendai because Tendai Buddhists helped to create spread Pure Land Buddhism to Japan. And there's a guy named Nichiren who has his own form of Mahayana Buddhism, but he would basically simplify Tendai. And what they were often trying to do is organize the teachings, because admitting that the sutras have a development is problematic. It means that your faith is evolving, and that people don't like that. People like a faith that stays exactly the same. So they would try to develop systems to understand the sutras and their development, right? So they're kind of the real big-headed smart guys about all this. Okay, we talked about Pure Land. One of the great practices of Pure Land Buddhism, if you get a chance, look up the Nembutsu on YouTube and you can listen to it, where they're just chanting the Amida's name or the phrase Nami Amida Butsu, praise to Amida Buddha. I remember when I was in Japan, I got to go to a temple and this dude was wailing on a drum and just shouting Amida, and it was so, you know, yeah, you've been?
Yeah.
Right? Isn't that how it's kicking ass, is what it is, right? They're doing the Nembutsu. They are going to the Pure Land. It's awesome, we love to see it. They would try to recite it daily, and if you're really a boss, you'll recite it at the moment of your death. And then, oh yeah, Shinran. He was kind of he was sort of the Martin Luther of Pure Land, in that he said, you don't have to be a monk to do the Nembutsu. Anybody can do it. Y'all can do it, right? You don't have to be a monk wailing on a drum. You can shout Amida right here, right now, right? Do it, yeah. And so this is one of the sects that's more popular even in America too, Jodo Shinshu of Pure Land Buddhism. Hey, look at that. It's kind of like Martin Luther. Cool. Oh yeah, he married. He renounced monastic, he was a monk, and then he got married. That's good. I love that. That's great. Nichiren, I don't know a lot about this guy, but apparently he likes this chant, praise to the mystic law of the Lotus Sutra. I agree, do you? Okay. Let's talk about Zen Buddhism. It's one of the more interesting, intriguing versions of Buddhism, because it might not even be Buddhist. Zen Buddhism comes to us through a guy named Bodhidharma, who came from India and arrived in China, generally located in Shanghai, and taught a really strange version of Buddhism that sort of evaded all of the scriptures and all of the other teachings and went straight to the mind. There's a lot of we're going to talk about them called koans, which are just sort of weird sayings that make your brain hurt. But one of the things that they'll often ask is, why did Bodhidharma come from the West? Which is, so why did Bodhidharma do what he did? Why did he bring Zen to the world? Okay? And it's so that people could sit for a long time and get tired. That's what Zen Buddhism is. Sitting. It sucks. It's no good. It's enlightenment. Anyways, let's talk about it. So yeah, Bodhidharma kind of arrives in China, and there is Taoism afoot in China. I think we talk about Taoism in 2 weeks. But it's a completely different worldview from Hinduism and Buddhism as we understand it. And this becomes Chan Buddhism. And it was, according to one scholar, it was more of a rebellion against Buddhism, right? It didn't in the end, it is most accurately described not as Buddhism reconfigured by Taoism, but as Taoism reconfigured by a Buddhism that was dismantled and discarded after the reconfiguration was complete. What that means is it is a different thing than Taoism with just Buddhist flavor. It's a different mindset and worldview from the Buddhisms that we've sort of seen before. Okay, with the cosmic Buddhas and the Theravada Buddhism, it approaches it differently. However, it still uses these backgrounds in order to tell its story. Right? It's chaos. It's chaotic. I love it. Eventually, it gets to Korea, where it's called Seon. Did I say that right? Seon Buddhism, or in Japan, it's known as Zen. I'll refer to it as Zen because that's what I'm familiar with. And one of its biggest emphasis is the practice of zazen. Okay, sitting on a pillow, being a Buddha. Right? That's important distinction. Right? Anyone can sit on a pillow. But when we sit on the zazen pillow, we are Buddhas achieving Buddhahood right then and there. Right? Because only Buddhas sit on the pillow to achieve enlightenment. Okay? I love Bodhidharma as the character of the founder of Zen. Has anyone ever seen one of these? What is this? What? I heard dragon? No, it's not a dragon. It's what?
Decoration.
Oh, yeah, decoration. It's called a Daruma doll. And right? Daruma doll? Okay. And it is a symbol, it symbolizes Bodhidharma himself, right? You can see because it's got a funky little beard, just like Bodhidharma. You'll notice he doesn't have eyelids. This is because the story goes that Bodhidharma was meditating in a cave. He loved to meditate in caves. It's a good place to meditate. But he fell asleep, and he was so mad that he chopped his eyelids off because he didn't want to mess around. Okay, he's trying to achieve his goal. Okay. You'll also notice that the Dharma doll is round. The idea is that Bodhidharma was the guy that allegedly said, fall down 7 times, get up 8. And so with the Dharma doll, the tradition goes that you color in one eye when you have a goal, right? I wanna pass this semester, right? You color in one eye. And when you're done, you color in other eye, and I think you're supposed to like burn them or something, you know?
That's all.
All my buddies just kept them. You
Yeah.
know? Yeah, right, you just decorate with them, but so, that's the idea, okay? So it kind of, it reminds you of your dedication to this task, this spiritual enlightenment. One of the reasons he's round is that he meditated for so long, his legs withered. This is the story. Okay, so that's why he's round, and he can come back up again, right? I like him so much, I got him tattooed on me, right? A lot of people do. But this was a lot of fun for the monks when I took this class. They started calling me Bodhidharma, and I was very embarrassed, because I am not Bodhidharma. Yeah.
So one question I have is, you color in one eye when you have a goal, and then you color in the other eye when you achieve that goal?
That's the idea. Yeah. But it's all part of this, it's a fun little doll and a tradition. My buddy, my roommate in college was from Japan, and you know, we did theater. He would always do one before a play, color it in after the play. Yeah, anyways. All right, who's Bodhidharma, right? He's from India, 6th century monk, takes up residence in Shaolin and starts teaching the Buddha Dharma. For him, he traces his tradition all the way back to the Buddha himself through the flower sermon. I'll tell you what the flower sermon is right now. The Buddha got all his disciples together, okay? And he didn't say a word. All he did is he held up the lotus flower with the flower and its roots in the mud that it comes from. Lotus flowers, they grow in swamps, basically. And he just held it up, didn't say a single word. And then one of his buddies, let's see if I put his name down because I don't know how to pronounce it. Anyways, one of the disciples of the Buddha smiled because he had understood what the Buddha was trying to say. This is called direct to mind transmission, wordless transmission. We don't need scriptures. It's just enlightenment passed down mind to mind, okay? And he was the first kind of guy. It's passed down 28 patriarchs to Bodhidharma. However, Bodhidharma is generally referred to as the first Zen patriarch, even though this transmission goes back 28 patriarchs according to legend. I like him because he's ugly. Gives me hope. Yeah, talked about that. Hey, look, flower sermon. Let's see. Oh yeah, you know, here's the thing. If you're gonna hold up a flower during a sermon, nobody's gonna get it. Right? If I did this on Sunday in my church, people would be like, what the heck? What are we paying you for? Right? But Mahakas, I knew I wrote his name down. I don't know how to say it, but he gets it. He smiles. He understood the tathata of this moment, right? You ever look at a tree? Oh, have you ever looked at a lotus flower? Oh yeah, there's something going on there, right? He understood it, and therefore he achieved this enlightenment and learned the Dharma without ever saying a word. The Buddha then affirms Mahakasyapa, and he says, I possess the true Dharma I, the marvelous mind of nirvana, the true form of the formless, the subtle Dharma gate that does not rest on words or letters, but a special transmission outside the scriptures. This I entrust to Mahakasyapa. So what he's saying is, you can get the Dharma through words and scriptures, but there is another way that is without words. It's more subtle. And this is what he entrusted to Mahakasyapa, and a few generations go by and we get Bodhidharma. There's two sects of Zen Buddhism generally. There's Soto Zen. This is the idea that you're going to gradually get yourself to the Satori, the enlightenment. Now we're in Japanese, so the words are different, but it's the same idea, right? We're finding moksha, we're finding enlightenment. You're going to have sudden experiences of enlightenment called kensho as you sit on this pillow, all right? And you might read some koans, you might not, except you're going to really like this guy Dogen's Genjo koan. Dogen is a fun writer. He's also like Martin Luther in the sense that he's ornery and kind of a pain in the ass. And that's what I like about him. Rinzai is a little more fun. So I took a class with a Rinzai nun, and she was weird. And it was really cool. Because here's the thing about Rinzai. Their belief is that you're going to suddenly awaken, right? You're gonna have a Kensho experience. You're gonna be enlightened just sort of suddenly. And that's the first step to this whole business. That's what we're trying to do, right? So you might be meditating on your pillow, but your master is gonna, slap tables and flick you in the face and hit you and just to get you to achieve enlightenment. So this nun, oh man, I hope she's doing okay, would just like, I would be walking around, she liked me, I had a Bodhidharma tattoo, and she would just like whisper in my ear, open your eyes, and they will be open. What does that mean? I don't know, but it probably worked, right? So they're gonna do crazy things, right? They don't rule out sitting on a pillow. We all love sitting on a pillow and meditating, but for them, they're trying to get these crazy experiences to help you break out of this world and get to your Buddha nature. And so doing so, they use things called koans. Koans, sometimes people call them parables, like Jesus had parables. But koan, they're a little bit different in that they might not have a logic to them. They have a logic to them, but they're not trying to speak to you logically. They're funky little stories. We're going to look at one at the end. But so for the Rinzai school of Buddhism, they're going to use a lot of these koans in order to get you to enlightenment. You might have heard of what is the sound of one hand clapping? Yeah, right. This is one of the first koans you might work on, and you ponder it, you chew on it, you try to figure out what the heck it means, and it helps to get you to a state of enlightenment as you ponder this. What they are is, the word koan literally means public dispute. So it's this is like a discussion going on at a public level, and your master would give you one, right? Because your master knows you, right? And says, here's what you need to focus on. And they break your brain and get you there, okay? All right, so that's Zen very fast. Any questions before we move on? We are diving through a whole lot of Buddhism here. How y'all doing? Yeah? Vajrayana Buddhism is called the Diamond Vehicle. It's a little bit more esoteric. They have chants and rituals that are very powerful, and they really do believe that anyone can achieve enlightenment in a lifetime. Again, it's mostly monks, but it's not even in the, right, with Theravada Buddhism, you might be a bad monk that needs to come back in a lifetime. Right? No, for them, they really do believe you can get enlightenment in this lifetime. And they really want you to find a good teacher, which is called a lama. One of the most famous ones is the Dalai Lama, right? You have maybe seen, right, we talked about the mandalas, right? That's one of their famous practices. Another one is these prayer wheels. They're almost like fidget spinners. And you do this as you pray. It helps you to pray and focus on the task at hand. But a lot of what they're trying to do is use these rituals and prayers to get to enlightenment. Tibetan Buddhism is probably the most popular form of Vajrayana Buddhism. It focuses on lamas, which is the word for gurus, it's teachers. These lamas are famous for reincarnating, right? The Dalai Lama is the 18th Dalai Lama. There were many before him. There might not be any after him. We'll talk about that in a second. Dalai means ocean lama, because his wisdom is so wide and vast like the ocean. It is said that the Dalai Lama is the reincarnation of, this is the Tibetan word for Amida Buddha, the Buddha of compassion. Remember the Buddha in the Pure Land? Well, that's interesting because he's supposed to be him. So is the Pure Land here? Ooh, curious. Tibetan Buddhism has issues today, which brings us sort of into Buddhism in the world today. Now, for a variety of reasons, China and Tibet has had beef, okay? That's one, yeah. And before then, the Dalai Lama literally lived in a golden cage because he was the Buddha. We had to protect him and let him be spiritual. So we were going to lock him in this nice golden cage and let him rule Tibet from there. However, because of the issues with China, they eventually flee to India. The 18th Dalai Lama will say this is the best thing that ever happened to him because it meant that he got to be free and teach and espouse his duties. But China kidnaps the Panchen Lama. Okay, so you're the Dalai Lama, all right? You die, you're going to be reincarnated. How do we discover that you're the Dalai Lama? The Panchen Lama, who's sort of the second command guy, will go to where we think the child who was you is born, right? And lay out some toys and do some other tests and help discover that you are the, did someone just say avatar? Right? It's kind of that. But that you are the Dalai Lama. However, China kidnapped the Panchen Lama, locked him up, which means we don't have the guy who's supposed to find the next Dalai Lama. We don't know where he is. We don't even know if he's still alive. We haven't heard a word from him. Oops. And so he is supposed to find the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama. So right now, the Dalai Lama is thinking about not reincarnating. He might be the last one, which would just be a completely different kind of Tibetan Buddhism. But so there are questions alive. This is happening because of life right now, right? This is the world as we live in it today that is sort of interacting. Yeah.
So he can control whether or not he reincarnates?
Apparently.
Could he theoretically come back if the situation was more favorable?
I don't know, maybe. I don't know. Or does he choose to be reincarnated and maybe he has the power to say, one of the things people are worried about is that he'll be reincarnated as Tibetan Americans, which would give a lot more influence to America, which China doesn't want, but he might do because he can apparently. Anyways.
Is there a reason he can't do it? There can't be a new pension lama outside of the original.
Yeah, how does a pension lama get appointed?
Yeah, I don't know.
Because you would think it wouldn't be the same one for all of the 18.
Maybe it's the.
Well, because he would keep being reincarnated too.
Right.
So I think maybe the Dalai Lama finds him, that he finds him, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Going back and forth. But we don't know if the Panchen Lama's dead. And, one thing I didn't mention, China appointed its own Panchen Lama, who is understandably going to find a Dalai Lama that's probably more favorable. Crazy stuff going on in the Tibetan world. So as we're sort of closing, here's one of my favorite koans. Emperor Wu, just so you know, was a very famous emperor in China at the time who was very favorable to Buddhism. He built a lot of temples, right? We like Emperor Wu. But here's what he says. He is talking to Bodhidharma, right, who is this great patriarch. And he says, I built many temples, copied innumerable sutras, and ordained many monks since becoming emperor. What, I ask you, is my merit? Now, okay, I know you can see what he's going to say. What would you say to Emperor? Probably some pretty good merit. Thank you for building all these temples and ordaining monks. Seems like you're doing pretty good, right? Bodhidharma surprises us. He says, none. What? Emperor Wu, but we like you. He says, none. Emperor Wu says, what the heck? Why? Bodhidharma says, because doing things for merit has an impure motive and will only bear the fruit of a puny fruit of rebirth, right? Doing good things is not going to escape the cycle of samsara. So now he's a little put out. He says, well then, what is the most important principle of Buddhism? And Bodhidharma says, vast and emptiness, nothing sacred. Basically what he says is, nothing. Nothing is holy. There's no important principle. It's everything has thisness, tathata, right? It's all here. It's all there. And so Emperor Wu, he's bewildered. He says, well, who is this that stands before me, right? And we know who it is. It's Bodhidharma. But what does he say? He says, I don't know. Why? What do you think's going on here? Someone explain what the heck happened.
You found Jesus?
Maybe.
I mean, camel through an eye of a needle, man.
Now, you know what I love is sometimes right after this line, it said that Bodhidharma floated upriver on a single blade of grass. I don't know what that means either. But here's the thing, we're not supposed to know anything, right? There's something here, something, right? yeah, exactly, right? Reading a koan is like looking at a colorful tree, right? It brings something out of you. It's pointing us to greater awareness, greater mind. It's pointing to the mind of the Buddha, right? And the idea being that you would have a koan that you yourself have, and you would carry with it everywhere you went, right? We would take Bodhidharma's I don't know everywhere we went, right? Whatever you're doing, right? You're playing basketball for UAF, okay? You're sinking threes. You sink threes? Is that what you do? Right? You're sinking a three, and then you're floating upriver on a blade of grass. We don't know. We don't know what's going on, but you carry it with you, right? And it helps bring us to this greater enlightenment, right? It reminds us that there's no merit in all this stuff that we're doing because this Spaha world, it's just fading away. So we focus on nothing being sacred. Let this world be. I like Zen Buddhism. It's weird. It's good. It's good for you. Okay. Any questions? That's Buddhism so far. Yeah? Okay. So your homework this week, it looks scarier than it is. There's 3 documents for you to read. There's 2 sermons that are said to be from the Buddha himself, Siddhartha Gautama. They're very short. Right? They're nothing like my sermons, which are far too long. And then there's some sermons, not sermons, there's some letters from a guy named Wan Wu, who helped compile a bunch of koans. He was a very famous Zen teacher. And so you're going to sort of compare and contrast these 2 styles of Buddhist teaching and see what's what. It should be pretty simple. Yeah. You guys want to meditate for a minute, or you just want to get out of here? All right. Well, thanks for being here. Have a wonderful week. We'll see you next time. I think you sent me an email, right?
Maybe not a name for my RTC.
Okay, yeah,
Because I went on a trip.
that's right. I know I got something.
I've been there. I'm sorry. I'm gonna try and like, yeah, for one. It's just not.